Set in post-Soviet Russia, Brett Lewis and Jean-Paul Leon's The Winter Men follows Kris Kalenov, a former Soviet super soldier who once belonged to an elite group of government-created heroes. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, he now works as a corrupt cop and gets caught up in an organ smuggling ring that has links to his murky past. The story blends crime noir, political drama, and superhero mythos, painting a gritty, realistic picture of Russia transitioning from a communist state to a capitalist one. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain, the show where screenwriters talk about the comic books that we love, mainly from the 1980s. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm Steven Bagatourian.
And I'm your other host, Chris Derrick.
And Chris, today we are talking about a comic book that is not exactly from the 1980s. We are making one of our occasional exceptions to our policy here, but oh my God, is this comic book worth the exception? We are talking about the fucking outstanding comic, The Winter Men, drawn by Jean-Paul Leon, written by Brett Lewis. And let me just tell the people a few words about these two amazing creators, and we can talk about this unbelievable comic that they've made here. Brett Lewis is a truly fascinating writer. You know, this guy has such an insane range to the type of work he's written over the last couple decades in comics. Brett has written such titles as Bulletproof Monk and Thief of Thieves for Image Comics. He wrote some Scooby-Doo and some Powerpuff Girls for DC Comics. He collaborated with none other than Mobius on a 14-page short story for the Halo graphic novel in 2006, a story called Second Sunrise over New Mombasa that was widely acclaimed. And Brett also collaborated with the incredible artist Cliff Chiang, who would go on to draw Paper Girls, of course. And Brett and Cliff, they did a story for the Vertigo anthology Witching Hour in 2013 that was Eisner nominated. It was called Mars to Stay. Fantastic story. And, perhaps most famously in terms of Brett's body of work, his magnum opus, so to speak, is, you'd have to say at this point, it's The Winter Men, the book we're gathered here today to talk about. And of course, that's in collaboration with JPL, and it was published by Wildstorm between 2005 and 2009. I gotta say, Chris, I don't know of too many writers in comics who have had a greater range to the work they've done than Brett Lewis. And this guy, really the only consistent thing across all the stuff he does is an incredible level of quality. He's an amazing writer. He has a idiosyncratic and unique voice. And he's a guy that really you would love to see more comics from, but he has a lot out there that everyone should seek out. But for today, of course, we're here to talk about the work he did with the amazing Jean-Paul Leon. Speaking of which, Chris, depending on the day you would have asked me for much of the last decade, I would have told you Jean-Paul Leon might be my favorite artist in comic books. And I know I've said that before on the show about Trevor Von Eaton, but those are the two guys who've been kind of back and forth in my mind for my favorite artist in comics. And today I am just so hyped that we're talking about Jean-Paul Leon, because I think you can make a credible argument that this guy is the greatest comic artist that we've seen in mainstream comics in the last several decades. I think he's a giant in the world of comic book art. His influences are clear in terms of Alex Toth, who he obviously drew a lot from in terms of his composition and his spotting of blacks and the way he arranged motion on a page with simplicity and elegance. And also, he studied with Walt Simonson at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And I think you can see some of the jagged line and organic sort of gestural line of Simonson in his work. But I think Walt Simonson would be the first to tell you that he's not responsible for creating Jean-Paul Leon, that Jean-Paul came into Simonson's class already an astonishing talent. And it was in that class that he met Brett Lewis at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Brett Lewis, the writer of Winter Men, who is a phenomenal talent in his own right. And I gotta say, Chris, this is just it's really an amazing team up, these two guys, because the dialogue and the storytelling here is exquisite. And I mean both visually and verbally. This is a really mature and, well thought out comic. And I think we were reading that the guys said they'd been developing it for over a decade. And you can see
crazy.
That in the work, right? It is crazy because it's like there's so much research you can feel in every nook and cranny of this book. And I feel like I learned about I learned a lot about Russia right around the time of the turn of the century here. Just reading this comic, it was an incredibly dense, immersive experience, and there's a lot to talk about here. But overall, I feel like you got two phenomenal creators operating at the peak of their form. This is just a phenomenal comic, and while it may not be perfect, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama that we can get into, this is still just a towering achievement, and it's a gorgeous looking comic, and the writing and the dialogue is at an extremely high level. These guys are playing for keeps. This is an amazing comic.
Well, I agree with you on absolutely every level. I think what I loved about this the most, and granted, I'll let everyone know that like I just was reading this thing that we got like our hands on called the artist edition version of this, and so it's like a sort of a different experience than if you're looking at like the floppies or the trade. But like the dialogue, it's so unique. It's so not like a comic. It's so not like a movie or even a TV show. Like something that came up to me when they were, I don't know, maybe issue 4 when they're like that little interlude issue, especially the interlude
Right.
issue. I was kind of like he's sort of playing this out like some sort of like it's a homage to some sort of like Tolstoy type of works, some Russian novelist, because he has these little digressions about like about the life in Russia, the hard time that is always part of that literature about how difficult the day to day life is, but they still find some humor in the way they approach situations because otherwise they'd go mad. It's sort of like what happens with Black Americans, like they come up with these funky ass phrases and dialogue because if not, the world they live in is so treacherous that it would kill them mentally, and that's what he's able to capture in this book. What I think is fascinating is a lot of times he has them when they speak in English, they speak in a way that as if a Russian is translating into English. Like it doesn't
Yes.
come across like
Yeah.
smoothly, which I thought was a
Right.
very interesting way to do this book. And it's like it's so smart. It's on so many levels, man. I can't. And the art is insane. You know, I love John
Yeah.
Paul like his work since Static. I remember that book he did called Earth X, which to me was like
Yes.
the first thing he did that I was like, oh, this guy's really amazing.
Yeah.
Because I like Static a lot, but it sort of felt like um, like Static is a teen hero book, and I always felt his art was a little was more, I hate to say it, but it's more mature than what that
Yeah.
content like
Right.
demanded. And so when he does a book like Earth X, or if he does Winterman, it's like he's at the top of his. He's like now I'm flexing. Now I get to
Yeah.
flex in a way, not flexing, but now I get to spread my wings in a way that I haven't really been able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
No,
book
I
is pretty.
agree. I agree with you totally. I think he's completely perfectly suited for this book. Kind of the dark elegance of the way that Jean Paul Leon creates a visual world. Like it could not be more perfectly suited than it is for this world of, Russia around the turn of the century, post-Soviet collapse Russia, and this grimy world that is so life and death. Yeah, you're right. This approach is just it's tailor made for Jean Paul Leon, and I think you could not have found a more perfect artist. And yeah, Brett Lewis, I'm fascinated by the research that Brett had to do for this book because you're right, Kris, it's so smart. And I can't even imagine the amount of reading or traveling or, I don't know what kind of research Brett did to achieve this degree of verisimilitude, but I will say that it comes across as a heavily researched book, but not in a way that's stilted or unnatural or forced or didactic. It feels so lived in. It feels very real, and it feels like the kind of book that would really reward repeat readings. Like I was saying before we recorded, just looking over some of the pages a second time before we started talking here, I was seeing new things in them. I was noticing new things, and I really would love to have a chance to look at this one more time. And I also have the artist edition that we both were lucky enough to get that both John Paul Leon's two close friends, Tommy Lee Edwards and Bernard Chang, helped to organize after the untimely passing of John Paul Leon. This artist edition was put together, and it's an exquisite tribute to this particular body of work, which apparently was John Paul Leon's favorite work of his own that he ever did. And I can see why. Because this really feels like it feels like this
There's a
could
lot of
easily.
care.
It's
There's a
so
lot
much
of
care.
care
It's so much
taken
care.
involved.
Really.
The thing that is really cool about his work, and I didn't pick up on this until I was, like I told you, I was reading the artist edition, and issue
Yeah.
3 doesn't have the dialogue. I mean, the balloons. I guess
right, because there's the lettering mishap or whatever
lettering
happened.
change. But,
Yeah.
but so the third issue, I read it thinking, oh, was this just a silent issue?
Right.
Like sort of like that one G.I. Joe,
Yeah.
or was that one like East of West that does that, and it reads so clearly. But I think about it in terms of like he does, like he understands how do I say this? He does a lot of shots where he'll do these widescreen type of shots, like a master shot from a movie, and it's a really wide shot, and it's very, very deep focus to a degree, and
Yeah.
you've got a lot of detail and a lot of people and a lot of like blocking of the characters and stuff like this, and he does this a lot to kind of like set the stage of so many different scenes. Like if like the guy Chris, he'll walk into a room and there's all these like commissars and bosses and to meet with him, and he'll hit you with this widescreen shot that's like pretty wide, and it's so detailed. There's nothing rushed, and he gives so. I mean, like there's a shot. There's a panel later on where, like, after they go, it's in the issue 3, and they come back, and Nina is like, she's one of the Wintermen, this character. She's like, she goes to the guy named Nikki, and she is like, I want you to show me my tapes. And then you're like, oh, what is this? And she comes and sits down in front of his TV to watch these VHS tapes because it's taking place in the 90s. And you're in his room, and it's like he's got like a poster of like Clockwork Orange in the background. He's got these little toys on the little the bookshelf, these little figures, and it's like you said, it's so lived in. And there's also those great moments that when Chris and Nikki are meeting at like it's a McDonald's, right? And they're just there to eat food, and it's just like, oh, but if there's so much like hustle and bustle going on, like you feel this intensity that if you've ever seen any footage or clips or news footage of life on the street in Russia post-Soviet Union collapse, like it feels so like you said, the research they both had to do get this to feel real, and because it feels really real. And even the scene, or not the scene, but the episode in issue 2 where they go to Brooklyn feels like Brooklyn. Like
it does, man. It does.
It's so well done. You're like, damn, like the level of like reference photographs he must have had to create this, but it doesn't feel like he's used a photograph like sometimes. Sometimes remember what was the book we saw, the Pepe Moreno thing, where he had like a photograph in there, and some people do this. Some people like will put a photograph. Like, what's his name do this all the time? Like Steranko would put a photograph in the background because he didn't want to draw the background. But John Paul Leon, he draws the backgrounds. It's very interesting. And sometimes when he does do gestural stuff and does kind of like, do like just silhouettes and shape and outline shapes and stuff like that, it still doesn't feel like he's cheating or cheating us in experience because of how he's kind of composed all the pages, all the panels, what it's supposed to do. It's really, really like an amazing piece of work, I think.
No, It totally is. You're right. And he doesn't feel like he's cheating when he uses silhouettes. It's always very intentional toward a clear reason in the storytelling. I mean, his spotting of blacks and the way that he kind of guides your eye across the page is just so masterful. And it really calls to mind just like the greatest comic artists in history. And he's one of them, clearly. It's like it calls to mind Mazzucchelli and Alex Toth and a lot of the European guys who I think also Leon would have been looking at, your, Sergio Tappis and other people that or Breccia. I mean, it's just the guy's work is just on another level. It's world class, and I mean, you can't even compare what John Paul Leon is doing to the vast majority of American comic artists working in turn of the century comics in America, coming out of the Image Comics revolution in the 90s. I mean, John Paul Leon really was kind of a man out of time artistically. And this book originally was supposed to be published by Vertigo, and then somehow it ended up landing instead at Wildstorm. But talk about like being like a weird sort of like fish out of water, one of these one of these things doesn't belong here. This is a really weird book in the Wildstorm lineup at the time. It doesn't really fit with the tone of anything else they were doing visually or story wise. I mean, this book is just on its own level, and unfortunately the production seems like it was a little bit tortured behind the scenes, and what was supposed to be an 8-issue series at Vertigo ended up becoming a series at Wildstorm that got truncated to 6 issues, but then 5 issues. And then after the 5 issues were published 2 years later, a special came out to wrap it up. And we went through, there's a lot of behind the scenes mess, and then 2 different colorists, 2 different letterers. But somehow, even in the midst of all of it, the book hangs together remarkably well, other than perhaps kind of a rushed final chapter or so of the narrative being squished together, where you get the sense literally that you're getting 3 issues combined at once. And also, did you notice it seemed like Brett Lewis was kind of breaking the fourth wall a couple times in that last issue, where he has Kalenov talk about like, oh, I was going to tell you more about this story, but I guess I'll just tell you the highlights.
Yeah.
And it was like, I thought that was like a nice little wink and a nudge from Brett Lewis about like, all right, folks, they're making me wrap this up here, so I guess I've got to. And then there was another moment in that last chapter where they were like, oh, there was a lot more stuff that happened here, but maybe I'll tell you some other time. We'll see. Like there was a couple of moments where they kind of nodded toward that. And I thought it was interesting too, at the end, it said end of season at the end of the story, which was kind of funny. And I thought like, felt like a TV show for a second. But then I also kind of remembered that the very beginning, the first chapter is called a man. What is it called? It was called like a man between useful seasons. So it was kind of like coming full circle on that too, a man between useful seasons. And then at the end of the story, end of season. But it also felt like we're ending a TV show. So that was kind of cool.
Well, but okay, things about this, sure. I mean, yeah, I guess, because it does say in issue 1, like this is 1 of 8 issues.
It does.
And there's
yes.
only and there's only 4 that are published, and then the special is later, which is crazy because it means that like if it was going to be 6 issues, but then later on, I think it says, I think issue 4 or issue 3, it says, oh, this is 1 of 6. So it just shows like, like, is that a problem with money? Is it sales? Is it what's going on? Because you make an interesting point. This is out of time work, because the thing that I noticed about this work and about his work is he doesn't do any kind of like, like quote unquote, like a comic book panel. That's like some really crazy angle or something like that. Like I think it's the Alex Toth thing you mentioned before, where it's like, I'm just gonna, it's very formalized, but in a way that doesn't feel boring at all,
not at all.
Because he's such a good, his compositions are so great. They're so, like, I mean, like I was telling you, like with issue 3, like I thought it was a silent issue because it reads, and there's all this kind of like, I mean, that's the scene where they go and they meet for like at the McDonald's to eat, and you can feel the argument that those guys had just in their body language, and I was like, this is so
That's
well
that's kind of
done.
amazing, man. Yeah, I'm looking at that issue right now as you say that in the artist edition here that we both have, and like, yeah, I could see why you thought that, Kris, because there's just amazing cartooning going on, and Leon's line work, like it switches up sort of like depending on the mood of the scene, and some of the stuff in issue 3 where it's like and he's in like some particular war-torn streets here and some money's changing hands,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah, it's
he's
like in
he's sitting
Chechnya or
down,
something like that.
yeah, in
Yeah.
Chechnya or something. He's sitting down with some rebels who have like headscarves on, and like that line work to me looks a hell of a lot like Bill Sienkiewicz at a glance. And
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating because it's like really loose, scratchy, gestural stuff that's super rough. And I mean, it looks amazing, but it looks very Sienkiewicz-y. And then, later on, though, you get to another issue, and we're looking like we're much more in David Mazzucchelli, Alex Toth territory, and the line work, still, staggering composition and spotting of blacks and all that, but the line work gets just thicker, chunkier, more solid, and less kind of ragged. And it's just fascinating choices because Leon's obviously making all these choices intentionally, but like his mastery over just kind of switching up and like making just adjustments and tweaks to his own style as he goes. I feel like it reminds me of people like Sienkiewicz or J.H. Williams III, where like, these guys who are just on another level and they're like, oh, you want me to draw like this for a little? Here, I can draw like this. You want to, hey, I could do this. So we're going to a new location. Let me do this for a little bit. It's like, but it doesn't feel showy. It feels appropriate for like whatever that particular sequence is. And I could see why you thought this was silent, man, because this actually plays. It actually reads really well as a silent issue.
Yeah, I mean, I I think you make a great point. I think that what's his name, Jace Williams III, his work is crazy because he has a very great compositional eye and a very great way of of showing you these sequential art that's not like too comic booked out, except for when he does his splash pages,
Right.
or like his splash pages are so like they're wild, and I think the one thing about this book, and I just remember in Earth X, it's like he doesn't get flashy because I think that a lot of times when you get flashy, you are kind of like designing. Now, I don't know this, but I just kind of think of this. What I'm feeling is that it's like the artist is designing the page around that one flashy panel,
Yeah.
or something, whether it's whether it's a splash panel or whether it's some, like not to take anything away from it because people do it really well, but when they do like that DeLuca effect, like the page is sort of like, oh, it's designed to showcase that piece of art or that little thing that you decided to do. And I think that what Leon does is that because he never really, it's this, here it is. Here it is. There's a really, really great quote, or not quote, but a little anecdote that Orson Welles gave. He was saying that he would hate it when people would come up to him and say, "Hey, there was this great shot in. There was this great shot
Mm,
in pain," or blah blah blah.
right.
'Cause he used to
Right.
say, it's not about the shot. It's about all the shots. It's
Mm,
the shots around it make that shot important. It's like
mm,
it's the laying out of what I did to let you know that when that shot hits, it causes impact because if you saw it on its own, it might not be it might not be that strong. You know,
right.
so that's what I feel what Leon does is that he is always showing you work that it's all in context. Like
Yes.
if you pulled a panel out, like you would say that's cool. But when it all kind
Right.
of fits within the page layout, it's like, oh, it's even it plays stronger. And I
Oh
think
no,
it's a very
100%.
very unique for him to be able to do that. You
I
know,
think you're right, man. You're right. That's a great point. And it really is like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in the case of his work because he's not being subservient to any kind of ego where he's trying to have one flashy money shot or like a splash page he can resell or anything like that. He really is a storyteller through and through. And it kind of reminds me a little bit what you're saying of the the piece that the Comics Journal wrote about Jean Paul Leon after his passing. And I think it was the journalist who wrote this piece was named Ian McEwan. And he said something kind of along the lines of what you're talking about here, speaking about Leon's work, particularly on Wintermen. And he says that filmmaker Michelangelo Antonioni once said something to the effect that there are two types of film: one where the camera follows the actors, and one where the actors follow the camera. I often think, and this is the Comics Journal writer saying, I often think about how this quote applies to comics. One easy, broad way of thinking about that difference could be: are you sacrificing a powerful composition of a scenario as a whole for the sake of a character's powerful emotional presence, or vice versa? In Jean Paul Leon's pages, I see a constant, vast scope to the worlds he's drawing, gazing upon figures from a distance in cluttered, lived in backgrounds. But always I see an intimacy of mannerisms, an interiority from a distance that makes me, the reader, the camera, want to follow the actor. This is especially effective in The Winter Men, a story about cold, inscrutable men where showing intimacy and interiority any other way might feel forced and unearned. I can feel the protagonist Kalenov's thoughts and feelings being withheld from me, as they would if he were there in front of me, even when there's ample narration from him. But through Leon's careful, slow burn examination of Kalenov's motions, he makes me want to be let in. I feel rewarded for every small glimpse into his reactions. His posture and a window into his soul slowly builds as I begin to know him more than he would ever want me to. And I think that's a great sort of explication of what's happening here, because it's true. There's nothing that's like cheap or easy about letting us into the world here. The storytelling invites a lot of participation and a lot of attention, and you got to really invest your focus in this, because there is no kind of cheap, easy kind of payoff to a lot of the storytelling in this comic. It's like you got to engage with it, and you do kind of have to follow this character around to really get to understand him and know him. And it's worth it. But like, it reminds me of like the kind of comics I would really fall in love with as a kid, where you didn't quite understand it all because you were a kid, but it all felt so cool that you wanted to just reread that story over and over again, you know? And I think that Wintermen has that quality. There's just so much here, and it's not giving up all of its secrets that easily, but you can tell that that decade plus of development and research was really spent putting a lot of thought into every aspect of this. So yeah, I think there's just so much here that's present in the work, and I don't think we can effectively talk about what's happening issue to issue, Chris, like we were saying, because there's just too much going on.
Well,
And
there's way
every
too
issue
much.
is so dense. Like, it feels like every issue is like an hour-long episode of a really great show on TV that has so much shit happening that we'd be here, for the next 10 hours trying to explain it.
Well, see, that's absolutely true about the density of it, but it's not overly written. It's
No.
just that he does it like there's a book. I can't remember is Martin Cruz is his name, I think. I can't remember his name now. Um he wrote this book called Gorky Park,
Oh,
and
sure.
it's which I thought is it's an amazing book. It's an okay movie, and I really thought they would have made that into like a TV series in like PTV era, because because that character is like it's like 4 or 5 books or something like that. And
Hmm.
and thinking about this now, like like this reminds me of Gorky Park, because what that did is it's like you have this character who's got so much, he's struggling with pain and hurt and
Yeah.
pathos. Like there's a moment in what is it? This is it the special when they go to Siberia somewhere to that snow city, and then when they get the girl, and then his wife is there. His wife
Right,
is
right.
at the train platform,
Yeah.
and there's like it's really cool. This is like some great elliptical storytelling
Yes.
in terms of like is it issue one when he offered the job. He's like, I don't want to do what you want me to do. I'm not gonna track this girl down. They got kidnapped because this girl got kidnapped and she has this liver. She needed a liver transplant, and the liver was from this super soldier like program. It was this
Yeah.
not super soldier, but it was like this at these things called snow cities where they would train people for the Olympics, and they would like to do all this kind of like weird like manipulation on the drugs and genetics and stuff like that. So she has this liver that gives her power. And he's searching after the thing, but there's a moment when he's like, I don't want to take the job
Right.
because me and my wife are trying to go on vacation because we're trying to reconcile something. And then
Right.
he comes home and she's already gone. He doesn't even come home late. He said, fucking, I ain't doing it. He's trying to do the good thing and be with her. And she leaves this note for him. And she
Right.
says it really cool in the note. She was like, I didn't want to write you this because it's going to be hard for you to read. It's like you're going to hate me to read it. And then you just
Yeah.
leave. But then now that issue, but then in the special, they come back and then she's there, like the girl Nina, who's part of their old Spetsnaz group. They like she's got the wife and they're on this train, the Trans-Siberian Express. You know, they have this like this. I can't tell if that's like a raucous time or if that's when they first met or when they met now or whatever it is.
I
But
think it's when they're meeting up now. I think I assume that's what it was, unless yeah, no,
well,
they get together, I believe, here again.
well, because it's a weird thing because it's like I could tell that he uses the colors to kind of like play on the time stuff, and
Yeah.
because I read that in the black and white, I don't know if it was.
Oh, right, sure.
I think it was now on the train because she was like, "Oh, you know what? I want you to fuck me everywhere."
Right.
Was just a great line. But the thing is
Yeah.
that while they're fucking and carousing and getting drunk and all this kind of stuff, it's like there's the letter being read. He's now
Yeah.
reading with the letter
It's
being said,
amazing. It's an
and she
amazing page.
I was like, "Whoa, dude, this is like," and that to me was the moment where the book was like, "This is I love this more than
Yeah.
anything I read so
Yeah.
long," because I feel that moment of like because you never meet the wife in the early issue and she's just gone, you think this is gonna be this ghost that's hanging over him for so much. On top
Right.
of the other ghost of what it meant to be like in Red 11. But now
Yeah.
she comes back and it's like what she says in that letter was like you just had too much pain. Like at a certain moment, like you just fucking me because you just wanted to like let to release pain. And she says
Yeah.
some interesting line about like I had to embrace violence. I can't. Some really cool
Yeah,
line
yeah.
about.
Here. I want to read a couple lines from her letter because it is really like it's shockingly well written, and I think I'm glad you called that out, Kris, because this moment really was affecting to me too. And it's like it really shows you just what a mature and interesting writer Brett Lewis is in this book, because this is the kind of writing you don't see much in comics,
Never,
particularly
never.
yeah, particularly something that's also kind of vaguely dealing with some kind of like superhero adjacent themes, in like a pretty light way, but still, but it's still like, this is a Cold War thriller, and this is some really emotional stuff too. And in the letter, when he finds his wife at the train station, and like you say, we see them kind of getting back together that night and having this raucous, sexual time together as they get drunker and drunker. But while we're looking at the panels of that, we see the captions of the letter that she left him when she took off. And
It
the
was like
letter
a year
says,
earlier. Yeah, it was like
like
so
a
much.
year earlier, right? Yeah. So in the letter says, I did not want to write you, explaining why I am gone. This will hurt to read. For a long time, I have hated you. I was once happy to be the one you came home to. I just wanted to look over and take your bad dreams away, but it's not enough anymore. You are not married to me, but to the past. Your world is dark and violent. There's never any money. The nightmares, the depression, the beatings. You have so much rage. I hate being close to you. I will carry the scars. I hated myself over resenting you for sex. I've made excuses for you. Not bad dancer, crooked floor, I always said. Was it the alcohol, the depression, the girls? I didn't want it to be important, but it is. I am a woman. And then she goes on to say, any sex with me, it was not love. You have so much hate inside you. You only fucked me. I began to institute violence because the more you felt like you were hurting me, the easier it was for you. I never understood you don't have soldier's eyes, but now I know there are many kinds of soldier. I once thought you were a sensitive person who never says a formal goodbye. It's all too clear. Things come and go. That's a pretty crazy letter that she's written to him. There's just like there's so much heavy adult stuff going on in that letter in terms of the way that they related to each other, in terms of sexuality, violence, trauma, all that. And one thing that's interesting there is like she calls him out for being a woman beater in that letter, and then a little bit later in the final chapter, we actually do see Kalenov, our lead character, our main character, hit another woman. And
Well, that's
that was
true.
kind of
Well,
shocking to me because this is our lead character, and you don't see that in a comic hardly ever. But
well,
it's
it's
obviously
not even a comic. That's not something you see in fucking anything
no, you don't.
that
It's
you have to.
realistic though, right?
It's
It's
realistic.
realistic as fuck.
Well, I mean, in terms of like you see it, but you don't see that as the hero. Is what
Right.
I'm trying to say. Like you see this domestic abuse in a lot of stuff. Like they use it. They used it really well in that show, Pretty Little Lies. That thing that was on HBO with like
Nicole
Reese
Kidman.
Witherspoon. Yeah, Nicole Kidman
Yeah.
and Reese Witherspoon. It was used really really well in that. It's not something that's like it's very it's a very sensitive subject
Yeah.
in movies and TV. It's a real subject in real life, but it's very sensitive to handle it in movies. But the reason why I wasn't that shocked when he hit that woman, that
Yeah.
whatever the secretary, is because in the earlier issue when they're like hanging out, I guess it's issue 4, whatever it is, when they're hanging out at I guess it's Christmas, right? And they're all getting drunk and they have a little argument and they kiss. But the last panel in that page is he's got her bent over and he's fucking her and he's like got his arm on the back of her neck. Like you see him being very violent in how he has sex. But it's weird because in that earlier moment in issue 2, when he's in Brooklyn and that woman comes, the prostitute, and he sees like she's got a scar on her face. And he's like, I don't want to fuck you. I like, like, and she's like, you have to, because if you don't, then they're gonna like hurt me. And
Right.
he says it in like a very like I can't remember what her exact dialogue is, but it's a very smart way of saying if I fail here because I failed before. Shamos was like, look, I haven't been that satisfactory to men before, and they've hurt me, so don't do that. But you see that
Right.
he has this sense of there's a gentleness about him, and obviously he shouldn't
Yeah.
do everything to like be protective of women, like the little girl and of the girl Nina. Like he's got a constant kind of like regret with her. And what I love about the story is this is why it's crazy that they never did any more. Is that they never explained what happened between him and Nina. It's never really
Right.
explained like what
Right.
the problem with their relationship, like what
Yeah.
happened, like the whole thing in Chechnya is not really like not really grappled with. I mean, it's something I actually want to touch on earlier. It's like this time period. It's a very fascinating time period in Russia because it's right before Putin. It's when fucking Boris Yeltsin's in charge. I remember reading, I think it was in Clinton's book or maybe some interview he did where he was saying how much of a crazy person Boris Yeltsin was. Not like a crazy person like wow dude, but like someone who was like not really like he didn't have the capacity to be president, and that he
Hmm.
drank all the time. And
Right.
there's a story where he came to Washington D.C. and they found him running naked, drunk. Boris Yeltsin. This is
Wow.
when he's the head, when he's the president of Russia, when he has Putin's job, and he was basically well, and Clinton and them like covered it up because it was in the '90s, and Clinton and this is when Clinton was saying, oh, this was Clinton in an interview, he was saying, this is when I knew that he had to give it up, he had to give up the power to Putin, and I think he's and they all kind of knew who Putin was, but they didn't think he was going to be as insane as he became. But it's this interesting time period where like this sense of being lawlessness and the collapse of your ideals, because there's always this sense in the book about like, hey, we're soldiers, this is Mother Russia, blah blah blah. This sense of like we had a purpose being super soldiers. We had a purpose during this war in Chechnya or during the whatever the thing in Afghanistan even years or like they knew what they were about, and the collapse of the Soviet Union, they lost that, and it's sort of reflective to me in reading this book now, sort of about like the crisis of masculinity that's going on now, like here in America, where it's like, oh, these men in their late teens and 20s, early 30s don't really know what they're supposed to do because all the like what's the word it's the mythos, it's the jingoism, like that had been attacked for the last decade and a half. And it's sort of like crumbled the same way that the Soviet Union crumbled. And this guy, Kris Kalenov, he's trying to reconcile, like, hey, I was Spetsnaz, I was Special Forces, I was like the elite of the elite. And now when you meet him, he's like sleeping in the snow in a park. He slept overnight in the snow, and I was like, oh, like the extent that he has fallen, I think
Yes.
fuels his rage that he doesn't let out, and he let it out on his wife. She's like, I'm done with this shit. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. It's so
No, you're right.
fascinating.
You're right. And it's completely realistic that he would have this kind of rage after everything he's been through. And you're right. It's a phenomenal character intro when we meet Kalinov. He's, yeah, like you say, he's literally passed out like a drunk or a homeless person in the snow in the park. And we see, yeah, he's at a very, very low point in his life. I also want to just point out the incredible visual iconography that Jean Paul Leon uses to identify Kalinov in these very, at times, very dense, very busy pages. I think it's highly intentional and smart that Kalinov wears a black beanie almost all the time. And
Yeah,
that black beanie, which has like, the emblem of, the Spetsnaz or whatever maybe the police force he's part of, it's got some kind of like little emblem on it, but it's otherwise virtually completely black, along with like the bandage on his face. He's got kind of a big bandage or two on his face, which, as you mentioned earlier, Kris, like seems like it should have been taken off at some point. But he's got this huge bandage on his face throughout the whole story. It really gives you a clear visual iconography to see this guy and track him across these pages, because you can always see that black beanie and you can see the band-aid, and it's a great way to just immediately identify our lead character. And when we get close-up shots on him like we do on some pages, that black beanie is just covered in ink. It's just tons of black, and he, half his face and half his head disappears into it. But it's just a really smart way to track our lead character through these incredibly action-packed, dense pages where there's so much going on. So I just want to call that out. And I mean, there's so much we could say about the storytelling here. I want to read just a brief review from GoodReads, where someone's talking about the Wintermen here. And the top review on GoodReads, I think, is kind of funny. It says it's 5 stars. Ignore all of these stupid reviews on Goodreads. Literally, this is one of the best comics written this century. Brett Lewis turns in the script of a lifetime with dialogue that feels so authentic. It reads like literal Google translations of Russian slang. The plot is good, but slightly hampered by its truncated run. You can tell that Lewis had at least, excuse me, he had at least 2 to 5 more issues of script in mind by the time issue 5 rolled around. And there is no praise effusive enough for J.P. Leon's work here. He was a modern master. This was his best work. It's a crime against comics as an art form that this comic stays perpetually out of print. And I would wholeheartedly agree with all of that. It really is like, it feels like career defining work from Lewis and Leon. And it really makes me wish that we had seen more Brett Lewis comics written by Brett over the years. And I know there's, a variety of reasons for that, I'm sure, but it's definitely a crying shame that we haven't gotten to see more Brett Lewis comics, because he turns in a truly masterful bunch of stuff in this storyline. And yes, it's not his fault that it was truncated. And so maybe that ending wraps up a little quicker than planned. But, you know, as you pointed out, Kris, there are so many brilliant moments of writing just sprinkled like jewels casually throughout this. I mean, so much of the dialogue is just casually, effortlessly brilliant. You know, like there's a moment early on where there's like a homeless person in New York that's asking Kalenov for money, and it's just like a throwaway moment, but it stuck with me because it was so clever. And I think the homeless person just says simply, I think he just says change,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like he's asking for change, and Kalenov walks by and says, "I'm trying."
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and
No,
like
no,
it's
see,
just so cool, just such a
that's where
cool little moment.
it's like that's where he excels in a way that is very, very um it's a very high bar. Like
Yes.
it's like that 9.5 like
Yeah.
that degree of difficulty
Yes.
because what he's able to do is he's able to provide you with dialogue that doesn't necessarily um it doesn't move the plot forward in certain places, but it's so idiosyncratic to the
Yes.
character that it's moving the story along even though it's not plot driven dialogue.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and not saying like plot driven dialogue is even expositional dialogue, but there's times the dialogue is like where you can tell, look, you know, like a lot of times they tell you, look, when you're writing dialogue, then you know it's sort of like action, like it has to, it's like you got to move things forward in the scene in a certain way, and it's like it's keep the conflict going. But this is where it's like a really great, it's a great channeling of what I know that a lot of the Russian literature that I've read has does really well is it kind of like it takes you through what's going on and tells you characterization and history in a way that is done through dialogue. And also there's so much great body behavior, there's so much body language behavior in what Jean Paul Leon does that kind of works with the dialogue that you feel that that's why the guy's like it's master. That's why that review is like fuck everyone, because he brings you in a way that feels like, oh yeah, there's all this like weird ass slang, like what do they call it, the thieves world, and it's just there's so much that you can't. We never get into it because it's too
Yeah.
much. But
Yeah.
but it feels like it feels so lived in. The thing too that I think there's a really great moment. I think it's in issue one. Um, this is the thing that's really interesting about like if you read anything that's like these stories from that are based in Russia, it's that like they have a very tragic history. And there's this moment where he goes into this travel agent where they know this old man and this old woman have helped with they're part of the root of the organ like donating, and he's and the old and the old woman is sort of thinking like, hey, we're gonna oh, so cop like Kris Kalenov, you're gonna like try to strong arm me? No, you're not, because the Russians, I mean, because the Nazis couldn't do it. You know, like and you get this sense of like they had such a tragic like the whole life of living in Russia is just beat down by like it's such hard living, and the level of like cruelty. And there's a line in there, I wrote it down because I think it was so like amazing, when he was like, and it kind of encapsulates like everything about these stories that are Russian stories. The guy says like, I think it's in issue 4, maybe it's issue 5, but he says like there's a motto of the KGB,
Oh yeah.
which is like he says something like, you know, our motto is to do, you know, like glorious terror in silence. And I was like, fuck, that's brutal. And but that's
Yeah.
someone who you know has like met with some Russians. Like to me, like I don't know how he did his research, Brett Lewis, but he really did it so that it feels like, yes, I'm an American, I'm writing about this, but it feels real because there's a lot of Russian people and Ukrainian people here in LA that I know that I've met that have that sort of like sense of like sardonic melancholy about them because
Yeah.
in Russia we used to do blah blah blah. In Russia, like this. I mean, there's that moment, and you know how hard it is. There's that guy they're trying to fucking like make him talk, and they've dug him in a hole, and only his head is like.
Oh God. Yeah, that was amazing. And that was where Kalenov just makes one quick phone call from Brooklyn to handle the situation back in Russia. And he's got some buddies to go find this guy that they need to agree to something. And next thing you know, they've buried the guy in dirt up until his head. And they're about to kill this guy. And then over the phone, he agrees to give, whatever the person wants Kalenov to get. But it's just this casual brutality that he clearly excels at, and he knows people that excel at it. I mean, there is just, there's so many moments like that. Like, it's a very generous comic book in the amount of fantastic ideas that are just jam-packed on every page. Like, they're visually and, conceptually and character-wise, there's just so much going on. Like, one of my other favorite bits, Chris, that this probably jumped out to you also, was in chapter 5. And just to be clear, because I think we've talked a lot about all the different issues and the back and forth on what it was supposed to be and what it was. There were actually 5 issues published and then a 2-year break. And then the special came back and finished it all off. So this is chapter 5, but not the special, which was the very final later book that was released. But in the 5th issue, they have this bit where you see quotes from a book that's like a business book called Growing Your New International Franchise, Going After Number One. And we're seeing Kalenov go out there and take care of some sort of like gangster type business that he's got to go take care of. And it's being juxtaposed against the various chapter headings from this business book, all about having like how to model your business after it says here, going after number 1, lessons from the US Cola Wars. And there's like a Pepsi Cola logo on this book. And so we get these incredible panels of Kalenov and his buddy just going out there and just wrecking shit, just murdering people and being involved in shootouts with other gangster type dudes across Russia.
The crazy thing is, though, is that they're actually doing a cola war. Like, there's a scene where he shoots up that Coca-Cola, like...
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
And then these guys are like they're robbing like Pepsi trucks and shit like that.
And they're in a cola truck while they're doing this. You're right. I should say that.
Real cola conflict war.
And it's like literal. Man. Yeah, it's like a literal cola war they're involved in. And the book chapters are so just smart and funny the way they're being juxtaposed against this sort of ultra violence that we're glimpsing. And so it says, like, the chapter excerpts say, be sure to hire people who love constant change and thrive on risk taking. Set a winner's growth goals. If you act like number 2, you'll always be number 2. Simple price slashing is seldom enough. The smart player innovates to deliver value. Practice competitive jujitsu. Always upset the rules of the marketplace to throw a rival off balance. And so as we see that, Kalenov and his buddy literally drive into their rival's marketplace where they're selling cola, and they start running motherfuckers over with the truck and shooting them.
Yeah,
and then it says,
crazy.
control distribution so you can serve the customer directly. And it just goes on and on like this, juxtaposing the business advice with the carnage and the brutality. But I mean, how fucking clever is that? Just for a page and a half in this comic, there's just more great ideas jammed into a page and a half of the Wintermen than you see in an entire goddamn series from someone else. Like, this is just jam-packed with high-level comic booking. And like you said, that thing that Brett Lewis does with his sort of idiosyncratic incidental dialogue, which is, I agree, such high-level writing. Like, it is like a 9.5 level of difficulty. John Paul Leon's doing the same with the artwork. And I mean, it's just really rare that you see 2 guys in top peak form like this fully engaged and invested in something that's a passion project that they've developed for over 10 years. So I got to say, like The Winterman, I mean, yeah, is it perfect? No. Does the ending feel a little choppy and a little rushed? Yes. But is it still pretty much a home run in terms of a comic? Absolutely. This comic is amazing, and it's just
Well,
clearly it's a masterful piece of work. It's worth being on everyone's bookshelf. I can't recommend this enough to everybody. It's a masterclass in comic book making.
yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, to me, the thing that I love about it is what you just read and what you were saying is that it's like there's just these moments in the book. Oh, this I want to say is that like it is truncated, but it doesn't feel like you have that is unsatisfying. It's so
Right.
satisfying because of like the story does wrap up. There's just certain things that are maybe not like fleshed out as much like as you want. There's a really cool moment in I wanted to where's this part in issue 3? It's like it's the way the dialogue works in this, right? Like there's a moment where um it's okay. They're like uh um what is it? It's okay. So there's a part where they're in that factory, and the guy named Baldy's trying to escape in the helicopter,
Oh yeah.
and and then and then he's like, "What's this? That was great here." He was like, the guy who betrayed him. He was like, "You were supposed to be my double agent, but that wasn't enough. You went outside." And the guy kicks back, "You are the turtle crawling. I am Dove." And I'm like, "What the fuck is this?" And then he said,
Oh, so great.
"Oh," he says the next panel. He's like, "I'll see you, boss," in quotes. "Next time I'm up an ass." And then he goes, and he says, "You were born through an ass, you coward. Get out of that thing and fight me." And it's just like, where did you get this dialogue from?
Yeah,
At
the dialogue is great.
and there's a great
Yeah.
part, so then he brings the helicopter down and it crashes, and the guy's line is, "Chaos, you motherfucker." And I'm just like, where did you get all this from? But it feels perfect for that guy, for that character.
Yes,
It feels
it does.
perfect.
It
Yeah.
does. And these are guys who've had hard lives, and they're quirky, and they're hard bitten, and they come from a very literate culture, like you say, with a history of kind of melancholy, deeply existential, tortured literature. I mean, these are the ways that people would speak coming from a world like this. And it's no accident that the quote on the back of the paperback version that I love here, from Warren Ellis, uh, specifically calls out Brett Lewis's dialogue in the pull quote for the book. For the collected edition, Warren Ellis says, "Brett Lewis writes some of the best dialogue I've ever read." And I mean, that's a hell of a quote coming from Warren Ellis. This is pre scandal Warren Ellis, where you could put a book cover quote from him on your blurb without anyone looking at you sideways. So this is the collection that came out obviously years ago. But Warren Ellis is absolutely 100% right on here. Brett Lewis writes some of the best dialogue I've ever read, and he also goes on to say John Paul Leon turns in the art job of his career. Also true, but I was happy that Ellis called out the dialogue specifically.
Yeah, well, because the thing is that if you think about this time in what 2004, 2005, like
Yeah.
Warren Ellis, people loved his writing on Transmet because he had that sort of like, who's the guy, the Gonzo journalist? I forget his name now. Fucking what?
Hunter S.
Yeah,
Thompson.
yeah, Hunter Thompson. Yeah, it's like he kind of channeled that kind of like very sailory language with these kind of like these weird kind of phrases of juxtaposing kind of like cursors, like that guy's like, yeah, he was like, "You're born through an ass." Like that's a line that Warren Ellis would be like, "I wish I had written that." I could tell because it feels
Yeah.
within that kind of wheelhouse of what he does, of trying to be shocking yet very like off the cuff, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I don't know. This book was amazing in so many ways. I mean, it's the thing about what I want to say. Oh, here's the thing that I thought was fascinating too. Right, that one guy, I think it's Nikki, or it might have been Drost, but it's like, um, he says he's writing a book. He's like, hey, I'm writing a book, and
Oh
blah
yeah,
blah. blah. And
the sci-fi
he's
book.
writing a sci-fi novel, and it's like the whole sci-fi novel is like I think was that in the finale that
Yes,
they
yeah. They
talked
have like
about it.
a little glimpse of the story for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. So we'll get to that in a second. But the cool thing about that when he first starts talking about, I think in issue one or something like that, he says something like, "Are you writing it in Ukrainian?"
Mm,
And
right.
you're like, "Oh, this guy's not he's not Russian." And it's interesting because like, like Russia obviously now with the war and like like Putin and Russia are saying that Ukraine shouldn't exist, but Ukrainian, it's like it's another like Slavic descendant language. But I was looking something up on this like I when the war started was when Putin was saying, "Oh, it's not really the real language." The difference with is which is just startling to me is that Ukrainian has got like another tense and it's supposedly more poetic than Russian.
Oh,
And that
interesting.
so I was like, "Oh, that's really crazy because all these guys who are known for having this really like it's so like it's so hard to translate Russian because it's
Hmm.
supposed to be so poetic and have these kind of like these deep meanings and how the words will work and stuff like that. And then I'm like, oh, in Ukrainian, it's supposed to be more than that. It's more poetic. And I was like, it's fascinating that this guy who's a trained killer, that's what he's trying to like channel his story into. And I was
Yeah.
like, it's really again a smart choice for Brett Lewis to even kind of like delve into that because that's like a nuance to the culture of the collapsed empire that you wouldn't necessarily think about. It'd be sort
Mhm.
of like that. Like, what do they call that? Is it called like mid-Atlantic? That little speech, that dialogue pattern that like they used to
Oh,
like.
oh yeah. It's like the kind of stilted style of speech that like someone like Marianne Williamson uses when she
Yeah,
kind of talks in this overly formal way, where you're like, "Where the fuck did you grow up, lady?" And we're like,
yeah.
what century did you grow
Centuries
up in?"
New
Where she's
Girlfriend.
like,
Yeah,
"Yeah,"
yeah.
she's like, "Hello, darling. The way that I will lead the country is blah blah blah,"
But
and it's like, were you raised by Katharine Hepburn like 100 years
exactly,
ago? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But it's sort of like if you were saying to yourself, I'm gonna write a story about a woman from that era. You're like, what are you doing? Like, it's such a crazy choice. So I kind of love that. Um,
Yeah. No,
I don't have
it's
that.
true.
Yeah, the I don't have that page up. That's the from the novel. Do you have that page up from the novel?
Yeah. I might be able to find it. And then also, just speaking to that as well, what a smart choice that was by Brett Lewis to have the soldier writing the novel there. Kalinov, too, our main guy, he's referred to alternately as the poet. And
Yeah,
he's considered a poet, who's ended up being a soldier, but he's still got the soul of a poet. And I think that's kind of what his ex-wife or his wife was referencing in that letter, where she said, "You don't have the eyes of a soldier," or at least
yeah,
I didn't think you had the eyes of a soldier. And I think we're constantly kind of intimating that Kalinov himself is also kind of like a more of a sensitive soul that's ended up becoming this brutal guy who is, had to live and exist in this other way. But yeah, I'm looking for that glimpse of the sci-fi book here. I know it's somewhere towards the end.
is
And then
it
the other
in
thing,
is it
I
in
think it's
issue
in the
4 or
special.
5?
I think it was in that very last special, I want to say. Was it? Um,
It's the one where they're having all this stuff at home, so that might have been
oh,
that whole
maybe it was five.
like,
Maybe it was five
Christmas
then.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you're right. Here it is. I found it. I found it. Okay, so they're talking with everyone, and so the guy says to the writer dude, "You're doing it in Ukrainian because it comes more natural." And he says, "More poetic," like you're saying, Chris. "More poetic. It's better for describing the place and time from your imagination." And then we see the title of the book, just in a glimpse visually in note cards, like little post-it notes that he has posted on the wall of his office, ostensibly. And the title of the book is Binary.
Yeah.
A novel. Chapter 5, we're getting a glimpse of chapter 5 here. There is no single instant in time. And the little bit from the novel, we see John Paul Leon draws like a cosmonaut in a little spaceship here in his spacesuit. And then the bit of the novel, the quote from the book says, he's just talking about it. He says, it's about married cosmonauts who each follow a different planet, orbiting at different speeds. They discover the movement of love through time, only to find they have grown apart as different people.
Like
And again, that's 3 panels, but what a fantastic little glimpse into this character's
it,
sort of soul.
I mean, like that's the kind of thing that reminds me of like Tarkovsky's like Solaris. Like
Mm,
it's so like, oh, this is like quintessential Russian stuff. This reminds me, like it's kind of weird. I think that, and I don't know what happened, so I'm only just speculating here, but it's like I think the collapse of the Soviet Union made it so that we don't really see like Russian films because there were a lot of Russian movies that came out, but there's this thing called there's a state company called Mosfilm where
mm,
that you would go and you had to like apply with your story to the authorities, and if they liked your story they would give you funding. So all those Tarkovsky movies like were made pretty much made through that.
mm.
um and but I think that when the Soviet Union collapsed, that Mosfilm and that kind of state funding disappeared. So it's sort of like there's this whole kind of like this generation of filmmakers that we don't see their work enough. Because even that great movie called Come and See, that war movie, it's maybe the most damning war movie ever made. Was this Russian guy made it, and it's maybe I don't know, it's sort of late in his career, but after that, he was like, "I'm making a movie ever again." It was about his life in World War II as a child, and he made it into a movie. But it's a kid trying to survive the war. He's a Ukrainian, and Nazis are coming, the Russians are coming. It's really so starky, but movie. But it's like those type of stories. That's what I'm saying. There's this level of tragedy
Yeah, yeah,
in the Russian culture because the Russians lost what, like 20 million people during World War II, something like some
yeah.
insane number, maybe 6 million, something like this. And it's just like,
Right.
what the fuck,
Yeah.
So, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
the number of Russians killed in World War II it was an estimated 27 million deaths
Yeah,
during World War II, encompassing military and civilian casualties. 27 million
million.
deaths. That is just fucking jaw-dropping. That is an
I mean, and
insane,
it's like
insane amount of
it's
people.
like multiple generations of people
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
dead, gone. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. That's going to cast a very long shadow, obviously,
this
for
long shit. And that's why that older woman who's like, we survived the Nazis. It's like, oh, like you have a real, so you can't threaten her,
yeah, yeah,
because she's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what are you gonna do to me?
She's seen it all. She's
I've
seen it
seen
all, man.
everything.
Yeah, I am so fascinated to learn more about the research on this, and if I get to talk to Brett Lewis anytime in person about this, I really want to ask him about this, and I'm kind of kicking myself, Kris, for not talking to Brett about this more because, as I've mentioned to you, Kris, Brett Lewis was a friendly acquaintance of mine for some time, probably about I don't know, like a decade ago, when I used to attend the what they call the drink and draw sort of weekly gatherings here in LA, which is something some of you listening might be familiar with this. But Drink and Draw is like a thing where comic book artists or comic book adjacent people, writers, artists, what have you, get together and just kind of draw and doodle at a bar. And it was just a super cool thing that was going on forever. That was, I think, started here in LA by Dan Panosian and Dave Johnson and Jeff Johnson, 3 fantastic comic artists. And it turned into a real big thing, worldwide. There's drink and draw events happening all over the world. But I was lucky enough to kind of be attending some of these LA drink and draws because they were 10 minutes from my house. And I got to be friends with some of the people there and had a great time just hanging out there and drinking, sketching, and just chit chatting about comics and bullshit. And Brett Lewis was one of the regular attendees at the LA Drink and Draw here in Casey's Irish Pub in downtown LA. And I had a lot of like friendly chats with Brett, but I'm really kicking myself for not talking to him specifically about the Wintermen, which was just really stupid of me. And I really should have taken that opportunity to do that over beers with him, because now I'd love to. But I will say, Kris, that one of my favorite Brett Lewis stories, really my my only Brett Lewis story personally that I love personally, because like I say, he was just a kind of a casual, friendly acquaintance. So it's not like I was kicking it with him every day. But when I first met Brett, it was like late at night. He was introduced to me by someone else at the table, and so I think it might have even been Courtney, our mutual friend Chris. Courtney was there, and she was like, "Hey, Brett, this is Steve. Steve, Brett. Brett's a comic writer. Steve's a screenwriter. Brett, you guys should talk to each other. Blah blah blah." And then Brett just walked over to me, and he was like, "Steve, nice to meet you, man. No doubt you were named after Steve McQueen. I take it." And I kind of I looked at him and I was like, "What?" And he was like, "I would assume you were named after Steve McQueen. Am I right?" And he just kind of looked at me and I was like, "Yeah, actually, you are right." my mom did in fact name me after Steve McQueen. And I'm sitting there staring at Brett at like 1 a.m. in this bar, and we're both a little buzzed, and I'm just like, "How the fuck did you know that, dude? Like, how did you just fucking guess that I was named after Steve McQueen?" And my jaw dropped, and Brett just started laughing because I think he saw the look of shock on my face. And I don't know if he told me right at that moment, but I think later that night, because we were in the middle of talking amongst a bunch of people, and he might have just drifted away. But I think later I kind of just asked him, and I said, "Dude, how the fuck did you guess that I was named after Steve McQueen?" And he started laughing again. And he was like, all right, let me just tell you. And he was like, "Look, I did a quick assessment of who you were talking to, what I'd heard you talking about, and I kind of sort of guessed, roundabout when I thought you would have been born. I heard someone mention you were Armenian American, so I figured your family were immigrants. And so in my mind, I just kind of quickly did the math, and I thought okay, immigrant family, probably immigrating to America in the 70s. They decide to name their kid Steve instead of some Armenian name. Well, who was a famous Steve in American pop culture in the 70s? It would have been Steve McQueen. So I thought your name's Steven, I thought, fucking A, man, Armenian immigrant came to America with his family in the 70s. Yeah, I just figured, whatever, man, there's a good chance you could have been named after him. So I took a shot." And I took a shot, and I thought, he was like, "I figured it would freak you out if I was right." And, he's like, "Every now and then I take a shot like that with someone's name. And, this time I got a hit." And I was like, "Dude, that was fucking amazing." In my whole life, I've met a zillion people. No one has ever, at the moment of being introduced to me, has said, "Oh, clearly you were named after Steve McQueen."
Yeah. Wow.
So that kind of blew my mind. But I think, looking back on it now, it kind of speaks to how perceptive Brett Lewis is, and kind of how quickly his mind kind of put together something.
Obviously, it's really fascinating.
Smart dude.
I want to point out this other interesting little aside.
Yeah.
This episode 5, issue 5, when they're doing all this stuff in the Christmas time, when Kalenov and Jost are out fighting and the wrestling in the snow, this great little part here where, he's now been fucking the mayor's secretary, right? There's this line where she's like, "He's so insensitive." And then this other woman says, "He fucks you and leaves?" She's like, "No, sometimes he just leaves." I'm just like, but there's so much in that panel that you're like, it's just like, it's this kind of dialogue that women are having amongst themselves that men usually aren't privy to. It's a very clever, like you said, observational. He's got to be a very smart guy.
Yeah.
Very, very smart guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. You can see that in the writing, that Brett Lewis observed people and their perspectives, and the dialogue really reflects that. I mean, there's just so much to learn. There's so much to learn, frankly, for anyone who wants to be a comic artist, who's listening to this show, who wants to write comics, draw comics, or both. I mean, frankly, you know, you could not you could not do much better than investing in a copy of The Wintermen and just studying this book. This could be somebody's Bible of comic book making, because if you had no other book to learn from to make comic books and you just studied the fuck out of The Wintermen, you know what? It would be a hell of an influence, and you would learn a lot. This book could be picked apart and examined for all the stuff it does right, which is most of it, and you could learn most of what you need to know to make great comics contained in these pages here. So yeah, these are amazing pieces that we're pointing out from this story. But the whole thing is just extraordinary. And let me just quickly touch on the other quotes on the back cover, Chris, of the collected edition.
Yeah.
Aside from Warren Ellis, they got a quote from no less than Joe Kubert.
Wow.
And Joe Kubert, the famous artist of Sergeant Rock, Hawkman, amongst many other classic DC books, one of the greatest comic artists of all time, the patron saint and patriarch and founder of the Kubert School for comic book art. Joe Kubert said, "It's not often that a comic book can effectively generate reality, credibility, and a really good read at one time. Brett Lewis and John Paul Leon have accomplished just that." And this is coming from, a grandmaster of comic art that probably established some of the most realistic comic book art, in his war comics that we had ever seen in mainstream comics at that time. So that's high praise from Joe Kubert. Also coming from Brian Azzarello, the writer of 100 Bullets and co-creator of 100 Bullets. He calls Winterman intense, original, and impossible to put down. And Brian K. Vaughan of Saga and Why the Last Man says Winterman is in the running for my miniseries of the year. High praise from BKV. And Brian Wood, another Brian, the writer, co-creator of DMZ, he said that Brett and JP have created a book that's the envy of the entire industry, a masterpiece of originality and style that appears completely effortless. And Stephen Grant, legendary comic writer, and did the Punisher miniseries with Mike Zeck. Also did Whisper for First Comics, that cool ninja book. Legendary writer Stephen Grant. He says, John Paul Leon's work is more open, precise, and let's not quibble, beautifully drawn than ever. So there you go. There's a smattering of reviews from some comic book luminaries on the back of Wintermen here. And then there's a quote on the front cover. Bizarrely enough, Chris, the quote on the front cover of the Wintermen Collected Edition is from Variety, like the Hollywood trade magazine. And it's one of those quotes that's like a little annoying to me because it doesn't go quite as far as it could, but I mean, it's still a good review. The quote is A-. The gritty visuals bring to life the jagged-edged world and rough personalities populating the Wintermen. I don't know if that's the best quote they could have put on the cover. They were probably happy they got Variety, I guess more of a mainstream publication, Hollywood publication, to give a quote. But I was annoyed by the A-. Like, give the book a fucking A. Like, come on, Variety. What does Variety know about comic books anyways? It's just, I wish it would have been a little more unequivocal. I mean, sure, the book's not perfect, but whatever. I just get annoyed when non-comic book publications offer their opinions sometimes. Maybe it's a pet peeve. I just figure the people writing for Variety don't really know comics.
Well, I mean, to me, I think the book, considering whatever behind the scenes work and, there's other things we don't know about people's personal lives and stuff like that, but it's like top notch. I mean,
it really is.
Like to me,
I mean, if it's an A-, what the hell are they giving an A+ to?
I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like to me, I could quibble with any of the books that everyone would say, like a Dark Knight or a Watchmen, right. Or if those things are A+, there's things about those books that I don't know if like that to me have like little detraction moments that I don't find in this. To me, the thing I like about this thing, it's the thing about John Paul Leon's art that I like a lot. His art is not again, this is in 2005 when art styles were still so heavily influenced by McFarlane, by Jim Lee, by Joe
Yeah.
Madureira, by all those people
Yes.
that had that very kind of like that very heavy line worked kind of like it's I would say it's overly detailed kind of work. There's the how do I want to say stripped down, but like it's like there's a principle in art called closure, right? Which is basically like if you draw just enough of something, your brain fills in the rest.
Right.
They do it a lot with like text. You see it all the time, like when someone does like a letter, like an A, right, and they leave out the crossbar, or only part of the crossbar. Your mind fills in the rest. Like it's this really interesting principle, and but he's able to do this in the book so well that you can't it's why to me it's on another level because he doesn't need to be so like I gotta tell you everything. Like I'm
Yeah.
trying to think, there's a panel. It's one of my favorite. Like, there's two panels in this book I think are some of my favorite. Just the panel construction is so fucking epic. Is I think it's in issue 3. It's like, let me see if this is the one I'm thinking. This is where it is. It's a moment when I think when he shoots the eye catcher, which is the fucking
Right.
fantastic name for a character, because
Right.
and he's like, I don't want to tell you how he got that name.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That's
like,
hilarious. Yeah.
fuck, man. Like, where's this panel? Let me see where it is. Let me see. Okay, here it is. Here it is. Here it is. It's just the scene where it's the panel when he kills eye catcher, right?
Mm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so it's like, like the whole room is sort of bathed in like his oranges and stuff like that, and he goes and he sees the guy, and it's just this panel of like, and when he shoots him, it's in yellow, it's a boom.
Yeah.
But if you look at the but and what's it like you see the muzzle flash is a brighter yellow, right? And there's the little
Mm.
bullet in the air kicking back. But when I first read this in the artist edition, like like the muzzle flash is actually he's got there's a line there. So when it was colored, they colored over the inking of it. But it's such a really smart little clever shot of like I'm not sure it's like a silhouette, but it's a little bit of like the drapery in there. You can't really see the gun explosion. It's not so like jagged out.
Right.
Like you catch the little like the Russian flag just on his arm, like you said, the beanie hat. Just a little bit of it's so smartly done. I'm like, God damn, like that's like a great panel. Like the violence in that panel. Oh, also the other panel I think is fucking fantastic. It's in issue 1 when the babysitter gets killed. Right when she gets
Oh God! And it's like the
right.
profile in silhouette from the side. Oh man, that's really
Yeah,
haunting.
it's yeah, and there's the blood come out of her tube of her. She's like spitting out food and the little. That's like such an amazing panel. Like that,
Yeah.
I remember when I first picked this comic book up, like whatever, 20 years ago, and I remember it's like page 2 or something like that. I was like, oh, this is gonna be an amazing book. Like this guy
Yeah.
is because when he's doing like Static and when he's doing like I said earlier, Static and Earth X, like he's stuck in like that like I'm doing stuff that's it's a little juvenile because I'm doing hero books, and now
Right.
I get to like play in like in the adult world, and it's like wow, like here's like here's what I really want to do, like
Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating you say that, Kris, in terms of the adult world, because it also reminds me that some of the cover work that John Paul Leon did that I think he was also best known for, perhaps to a lot of people, he did the covers for a lot of very quote unquote adult comic series that were published by Vertigo and Dark Horse. Like he was the cover artist, remember, on Tom King's first serious work for Vertigo, which was The Sheriff of Baghdad,
yeah,
later renamed The Sheriff of Babylon. Now, John Paul Leon did all the covers on that, and some people may not remember that because Mitch Gerrards drew that book beautifully also, and he's rightly associated with it. But I believe it was John Paul Leon who did all the covers on Sheriff of Babylon, and they were exquisite and they were amazing covers. And he also went on to do the covers, many of them for DMZ, for the
Yeah.
aforementioned
Yeah.
Brian Wood.
Brian Wood book,
Those DMZ covers were incredibly stylish, really smart, thought out covers for that very kind of realistic, sort of heavy book, dealing with a lot of military stuff there. And then also he went on to work more with Brian Wood, doing covers for another book that he did at Dark Horse that nobody really talks about much anymore these days. But it was a book called, I think, The Massive. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
it
I remember
was
reading that.
it was
Yeah.
like a post-apocalyptic flood book or some such. I don't know. I
Wait,
never
wait,
really
wait,
read
wait.
it.
Wait. Did he just do the covers, or did he do the
Yeah.
interiors?
No, he just did the covers. If he did the interiors, I would have read it. But he just did the covers. Yeah, the interiors were somebody else.
So I'll say two things. So the Sheriff of Babylon and the Massive, I was
Yeah.
picking those up just because of the covers. Because in my
The covers
mind,
were amazing.
it's like, like I like obviously comic covers can be anything, but I feel like but what John Paul Leon did for those books, his work was like it was channeling the thematic essence of those stories very, very well. And I do remember the
Yeah.
Massive. I actually remember. I think that was the first stuff of Brian Woods that I read, and I liked
Oh,
that a
really?
lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. You didn't read DMZ before that, or Northlanders, or anything else?
No, because Northlanders was like when because it was a time when I was coming back into comics, and Northlanders
Mm,
was already like in tail end of his. I don't know, it was deeper into his run, like maybe in his 20s or something like that. And I was like, I gotta go back and find back issues and blah blah blah. And and when I was getting back into comics at that point, like the comic stores had all kind of like consolidated, so it was a lot
right.
harder to find back issues. You had to go hunt them on fucking eBay or shit like that. And I kind of
Right.
like missed there's a joy in when I was a kid for hunting for back issues. Like you go to the store, like
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. Oh
you
my
fucking
God. It
go to
was
like
like the coolest thing.
you fucking go to a
Loved it.
new store. You go, I'm gonna
Oh,
go to a store.
yeah.
You driving around Cleveland. Oh, there's that
Oh,
store,
man.
comic store. What do they have in there? What do they have in there?
Yeah.
What
Oh,
do
I
they have in there?
missed that.
My mom
Oh,
was so
man.
pissed. Like, you need to go in there. I go, I do. Because you know what?
We
Like,
have to go there.
well, she's like, just comics. I was like, yeah, but they're gonna have different. They'll have a different like selection of back issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, I actually like the Massive. I'm not. Yeah, you're right. No one talks about it.
No one talks
But
about it. Like literally, no one talks about it. It was Christian Donaldson was the artist on
but
the Massive, and then also Gary Brown or Jerry Brown, and then Gary Erskine, Declan Shalvey, and Daniel Zezelj. So it had a bunch of different artists, but it was I think Christian Donaldson and Gary Brown that did the most issues on that book.
oh yeah, it had the Croatian guy that you mentioned. Um,
Zezelj.
yeah, Zezos. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
great.
he is. He is. He's got a
Great
really
style.
unique
Yeah.
style. Totally. Oh, and I'm noticing here that this was colored by Dave Stewart, which reminds me, we forgot to give a shout out to the colorist and the letterer on Wintermen, which is a big oversight on our part because the coloring and the lettering is phenomenal for the most part. It's amazing. And it's Dave Stewart handling the coloring along with Melissa Edwards, who is the wife of Tommy Lee Edwards, who was one of John Paul Leon's very best friends and a phenomenal comic book artist in his own right. And John Paul Leon was really close with Tommy Lee Edwards as well as Bernard Chang. And they were his two best friends, as far as I know, who were the ones who put together this Wintermen Artists Edition with the help of John Paul's family, which is the thing that Kris and I are so proud and lucky to have copies of, because I think they only printed up about 1,000 of these. And it's an amazing, amazing tribute to JPL's
Well, I mean,
work.
for us to get these, we were lucky because we got them after the thing had ended, and we just happened
Yeah,
to be
it was a Kickstarter type thing. I think it was
thing
Zoop.
was done, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we knew, was it Kat who knows
Yeah,
Bernard?
we had a mutual friend who knew Bernard Chang, who really managed to hook us up, which was really amazing and very,
Yeah.
very much appreciated by us. And obviously, we paid for the books, but we were really lucky that Bernard had a few extra copies lying around his studio. And what an incredible tribute to John Paul Leon's work. I mean, I've only got like 5 artist editions, I think, Kris. And I've got, this John Paul Leon one now, and to go along with my Jack Kirby New Gods, my Dave Mazzucchelli Born Again, and my Mike Kaluta Starstruck. And I think maybe that's it. I might be forgetting one, but I've got either 4 or 5, but
Did
those are
you
the
get
ones I can remember.
wait, did you get the oh, you said the Born Again. I was thinking of Batman
Yeah.
Forever. Thinking Batman Year
No.
One.
Oh no, Batman Year One. I got the absolute double slipcase one, but I did not get the artist edition of that one yet.
It's amazing. I have it.
I
It's
know, I
fucking
know. That one
amazing.
I
It's
do. That
fucking
one
amazing.
I do need to get that. I do need to get that. But anyways, I should say Dave Stewart and Melissa Edwards split the coloring duties on Wintermen. They both did an astonishing job. The color adds a lot to the book in its own way. Although, as we say, the work looks exquisite and perfect in black and white, but they definitely added a different dimension to it, and the coloring looks beautiful in its own way. And the lettering on this was done in large part by John Workman, who I think is perhaps one of the two or three greatest letterers in comic book history, along with Todd Klein and maybe one other person. John Workman is one of my favorite letterers. Of course, did that incredible run on Thor with Walt Simonson. And as far as I know, Chris, I think that Walt Simonson, John Paul Leon, and Tommy Lee Edwards all have had it, I think, literally written into their contracts, more or less, that John Workman has to be the letterer of all of their work, or historically, they had insisted on that for decades. And you'll see that if you look back at the work from John Paul Leon, Tommy Lee Edwards, and Simonson, it's virtually all lettered by John Workman, the vast majority of it lettered by hand. And I think it adds tremendously to the work of those guys, and they clearly understood the importance of Workman's letters. So I don't want to undersell that, because the lettering on this book is
No,
phenomenal.
it's
It's
amazing.
amazing lettering. It's
It's
amazing. It looks
amazing.
beautiful.
I think the thing that he does really well in this book, and I remember this from other stuff that he did with Simonson's Thor. Maybe that's why Simonson loved working with him. And obviously Simonson taught um, taught
Jean
John
Paul.
Paul Leon, is that he's very good at like shoving the balloons so they cover up the least amount of art. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, like I remember you always talk about the tangents and stuff like that. You know, but
Yeah.
the thing that he does a lot is he puts balloons right up against the panel border and just is like,
Yeah.
look, I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to have. I mean, it's interesting because because that way he's like, there's maybe another, I don't know, like a quarter inch that
Yeah.
he's pushing it away from the art by doing that. You know, it's very clever. The way he does a lot of it. There's like some really great sound effects in here, like that part when he shot uh when the guy named Eyecatcher got shot,
Yeah.
the sound effect was just tap. You know,
Yeah.
there's
That's
that.
right. Very unusual sound effects.
Unusual.
Yeah.
There's also the one where you remember in issue 2 when he's shooting the guy in the leg in the taxi.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm.
and the sound effect is clap. It's like clap. I'm like,
Oh,
oh, that's
that's
like a
actually
smart.
that's
That's a
so
smart.
clever.
It's a clever
Yeah.
kind of like word choice. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
if that's him choosing that, or is that
I'm
really
guessing that's a
is
good
it Brett
question.
Lewis? You know, I
I
mean,
don't
it's
know. It could be Brett. I'm guessing it could be Brett. Now that you say that, I'm noticing the car crash that happens in issue number 1 on page 13, where the car flips over. The sound effect when the car flips over is wreck. RRREK. Like a car wreck.
yeah.
Wreck. Which is
Well,
a clever sound
yeah,
effect for a
yeah,
car wreck.
it's great, and it's also letting you know that it's like it's kind of like, "Rah," and
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
it's gonna
Totally.
explode.
Totally.
It's kind of like it's
Yeah.
blowing up, you know,
Yeah.
and
Wreck. Yeah.
it's cool
Super
because
cool.
like I mean like those earlier 3 panels in there when the car is like flipping, there's no sound effect. You know, there's no
Right.
screams, there's
Silent.
no
Yep.
there's no
Yeah.
bang when it flips over. It's restrained use of that, but also like yeah, it's really I don't know, it's really smart, and there's
No, it's
hardly
highly intentional.
yeah, it's like this is we talk about this all the time, like the intentionality of an artist. Like you really don't want to just be placing stuff like just to be placing stuff.
No,
And
no, not at all. And Workman, like you say, it's so great the way he kind of does prioritize the artwork. And he does, now that you say that, I'm noticing that too. He does run so many of these balloons right up against the border, saving space that way. But then he also, I think, is really well known for these balloons that are like unusually perfect circles that have a lot of white space, relatively speaking, around the words, but they just look incredibly aesthetically pleasing. You know, they're very, very aesthetically pleasing. And it's something that we've talked about, Chris, I think with screenwriting, and I think it applies to comics or any type of storytelling. Like, anything that is like friction, that causes you to sort of like hiccup or bump as a reader is something that takes you out of the story to an extent. And I think that's something about the way that he chooses to draw his word balloons as almost perfect circles as much as he can around the words, like subconsciously, there's that thing about how circles are just pleasing to the human eye. And that's why Mickey Mouse, like the design of Mickey Mouse famously is just three big circles, and he's the most,
Yeah.
famous cartoon character of all time. And like, I think Workman is sort of capitalizing on that subconscious kind of like human comfort with perfect circles. So, as much as possible, the balloons are in that shape. And I think something about it aesthetically works so well with this very organic hand drawn artwork that it all just kind of feels of a piece and it's frictionless. As I'm looking at these pages, it's frictionless. And it's the complete opposite of what we find with font lettering in comics today, where those, mechanical lines and those actual fonts give you a ton of friction with any artwork that looks even vaguely organic because it just doesn't work. It doesn't match. And I will spare everyone my lengthy soapbox rant about the poison that is fonts on comics today. But this is the opposite of that, except we should mention there are a couple of issues here where Workman, I think for whatever reasons, because of the scheduling issues or some such, is not able to do the lettering. And Jared Fletcher comes in, and although I believe he is using a font on those issues, I will say, to be fair, that Jared Fletcher does about as good of a job using a font to try to make it work within the world of the story as you could possibly do. And I didn't find it as offensive or as jarring as I typically find most font lettering. So I have to give it up to Jared K. Fletcher. I think he did probably the best job he could have given the circumstances and what he had to work with. But I will say that John Workman issues, that lettering for me is the perfect lettering
Well,
for the John Paul Leon artwork.
well,
It's amazing.
I think the thing that the guy does with the font lettering, which I appreciate, is that he doesn't use all capitals.
Hmm.
And it's part of the style that Workman uses. That Workman, a lot of times when he's like trying to like whisper or whatever it is, or when they're speaking in another language, or especially when they speak English, like they would all it was, and English is all lowercase, and I feel like that kind of gives it like less of a, it doesn't feel so like generated,
Mhm.
because it's just I don't know. It's something I noticed when I went back to have to reread the issue 4 and 3 in because I didn't have those the balloons in the artist edition. I was like, oh, like I kind of get this more now because this that is it's not as jarring to me, but then again, it's like when I look at it like like on these bigger pages, these whatever the
Yeah.
comic book, it's more evident on what's happening, and you're like, oh, like I see what's going on here. Like this doesn't yeah, it's not the same. It's interesting you bring that up. There was an interesting, I might have mentioned this before, but there's like an interesting Donald Westlake, that author. He had a quote that I always remembered, and he was like, at any time you might lose the reader on the page. You
Oh
have to
yeah.
you have
Yeah.
to like be aware of that. And that's
Oh
like,
yeah.
and I bring that up to your quote about the friction. Like the minute you do something that kind of like and I mean I think later on the quote he's like, you have to, the tricky thing is if you do that is um then you got to spend a lot of time, or the reader's got to spend a lot of time to get back into the story flow.
Yeah.
So it's, I was reading something about this, like, I don't know if I'm doing this tangent, but I will, but it's like, um, this is why it's like it's difficult to multitask,
Oh
because
right.
there's studies that show that like if your concentration gets broken, it takes you like 22 to 27 minutes to get back into the flow state. Once,
Right.
so if you just if you're, so when you're constantly switching things, like you're never getting into that flow stuff. And it's sort of like, again, with the friction in the writing, particularly with the writing, and when you're reading the comic, it's like that experience, like you want it to be as smooth as possible. So there's no like, what's happening here? Because then you might start thinking about things that you don't, that are, you're questioning certain things. That's why sort of like the brilliance of this book again is like how he does layouts. Like he doesn't shoot I want to say his compositions are very smart because he's like I'm gonna find this angle. You know, who was the guy who says was it Martin Scorsese's like directing is everything that's outside of the frame. You know,
Yeah,
it's like knowing what to put out of the frame, and it's like, oh, that's what John Pagliaro like does really well. Is he knows exactly what to put in the frame, so you can like
yeah,
follow the story without anything extraneous. And but again, yeah, it's so clever. And then his style, it's like his instead of that like stripped down style that that makes it's easier to read too, because like we said, there's a lot of text in this. There's a story being told,
yeah.
but but you go through it quickly because the art is laid out so well.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's two really really brilliant creators working at the top of their form. And honestly, we're just really lucky in comics that we had the opportunity for Wintermen to be made and published by a major publishing house where this book was such an odd duck. And thank God they were able to finish the story in whatever fashion they could, because it really is a gift to comics that this book got finished at all. And one of the things I want to make sure that we touch on here, Kris, just before wrapping up, is I wanted to just read a little bit from Walt Simonson's afterword that he wrote for this artist edition that we have, and I think there's just some touching things here that Simonson says that I think it would be nice to share just a few lines of this.
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay, cool. Because I know not everyone's going to get a chance to look at this book, and Walt Simonson's obviously one of the all time greats, and I think it's fascinating that he was John Paul's teacher at SVA here, and Brett Lewis's teacher for that matter. Um, so here, Simonson starts off his afterword to the Winterman Artist Edition by saying, "There was a lot about the late John Paul Leon not to like. He was good looking. He was gentle. He was brilliantly talented. He had a burning desire to get better. And he had an incredible work ethic. I mean, come on, really? Really? How could you like a guy like that?" In 1990, it's pretty funny. In 1992, I started teaching a class at the School of Visual Arts, SVA, in New York City. My class was titled, rather presumptuously, something like The Graphic Novel for Illustrators. I can only say that it wasn't my title. I was just trying to teach a course about the kind of visual storytelling you find in comic books. As I recall, that first class was made up of juniors and maybe seniors. It was a really good class, and I had several ace students in it. Jean Paul Leon was one of those. As a fledgling teacher, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Okay, so that's pretty sweet to hear Simonson's perspective of first having JPL in his class. He goes on to talk about in this forward how in the middle of teaching, John Paul Leon got hired to draw static for Milestone, and he was going to be drawing static for Milestone Comics while still in Walt's class. And John Paul Leon asked if he could not do the regular class assignments and just bring in pages of static instead to be critiqued. And Simonson said, "Sure, no problem." And so then for the rest of the school year, I critiqued issues of static. They were impressive to start with. It was a treat to look at them from the beginning, and they only got better as the year went by. I don't claim any credit for that. John Paul was not only filled with talent, but maintained an incredible work ethic over the course of his career that carried him from strength to strength. And then he goes on to say, I don't remember talking about Wintermen much. I gather that he thought of it as a high watermark of his career. Even if that's true, I think he was probably underselling himself. To me, he just seemed to go from high watermark to high watermark as the years went by. How annoying. And pretty funny. Again, Walt striking a really a sweet tone with all this. He goes on to say, John Paul Leon was also ill for years and fought bravely, producing an incredible body of work during that time, and then he was gone. Damn it. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot not to like about JP. I hate that I'm writing this afterwards as a posthumous tribute. I'm unhappy that hundreds of thousands of people, including me, won't be dazzled by any brilliant new artwork from him. I'm sometimes overwhelmed by the knowledge that I won't see him again somewhere down the road at a convention, or talk to him on the phone and shoot the breeze with him, talking about art and drawing and storytelling, things we both loved. At the same time, I'm grateful that he used his far too limited time on Earth to produce so much beautiful work and to share it with the rest of us. I'm thankful he set the bar so high for so many of us. I'm thrilled that one of his drawings hangs in our front hallway, even if it does make me both happy and sad at the same time whenever I enter or leave my studio. That damn drawing still fills me with awe, and I'm proud to have been his teacher, even if I don't believe for a heartbeat that I had anything to do with the artist he became. He was his own master. Thanks for everything, pal. Love you. Godspeed. Walter Simonson.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, what can you say? Walt Simonson, one of the all-time greats, struck with awe looking at the Jean Paul Leon art that he has in his studio. That's just that's beautiful. So Jean Paul Leon obviously made an incredible mark in comics during the career he had, and there is really there's not a bad comic he ever drew in his life. So if anyone's curious about Jean Paul Leon, feel free to pick up, as you mentioned, Chris, Earth X. Jean Paul Leon also did a terrific Batman miniseries. I believe it was the final thing he ever did with Kurt Busiek that was called Batman Creature of the Night. It was like a 4-issue prestige thing that was just beautifully drawn. That's another, right to the very end, his very last piece he produced was just exquisite. He never drew a bad comic. He only drew just gorgeous, unbelievable, stunning pieces of work. Seek out the work of Jean Paul Leon wherever you can find it, folks. And in particular, go get this Wintermen collection. You can find the regular collection, hopefully for not too much money out there. And if not, as we always recommend on this show, just go buy the floppies. The floppies are definitely out there. They're not going to run you too much money. There's only the 5 main issues plus the special. You're talking about 6 floppies. Just go buy those if nothing else, because I don't know if the paperback's going for a lot on eBay these days or not. But however you can, track this comic down. The Wintermen. It's got our highest possible recommendation here from CRYB. This book's amazing.
Absolutely. Like, it's so good. You can't get you try to get the artist edition, but I think the one thing about the artist edition is that you do miss the really, really clever color design. It's a style that is, you see it today every once in a while. It's not anything that the mainstream books do. It's very muted. It's turned down and muted in a way that kind of reflects like the cold temperature of the environment that the story takes place in, which is a very interesting kind of like just choice to do. It's super well done. Can't, like you say, can't give it higher praise. Just can't.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, this is a mic drop of a comic, and I can understand, when Brian Wood said the book was the envy of the entire industry. Simonson says, Walt Simonson says, Jean Paul Leon keeps setting the bar so damn high. I mean, I think this book is the epitome of that. If you're a comic creator and you want to see comics being done at the highest possible level, pick up an issue of Wintermen. Your jaw is going to be on the floor, and you got a whole lot to study here. So, check it out, and thanks for listening, folks. We'll probably cover more Jean Paul Leon at some point on this channel, and hopefully one day we will also see some more Brett Lewis comics, because these guys knocked it out of the park, and God bless them both for gifting us this amazing comic, The Wintermen.
Okay, everyone, thanks for listening, and we will be back shortly with another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain.